Imagine waking up to find national parks barricaded, museum doors locked, and over 1 million federal workers suddenly not getting paychecks. It sounds like a political thriller, but it's real life. The US government is partially closed right now. How did we get here? And what does it mean for all of us? Why would the world's biggest government simply shut down? Wait, let me explain. Across the country, volunteers step up to help furloughed families. Food drives, rent assistance, and community support fill urgent gaps. At the Capitol, negotiations stall as deadlines pass. Behind closed doors, pressure mounts while essential services strain and public frustration grows. A government shutdown happens when Congress fails to pass a budget or short-term funding in time, leaving federal agencies without money to operate. In simple terms, no funding, no functioning government. When the deadline hits and funding isn't approved, federal offices legally can't spend money. So many operations come to a screeching halt. Agencies activate contingency plans, non-essential services are paused, and hundreds of thousands of federal employees are furloughed, sent home without pay until the shutdown ends. Meanwhile, some essential workers, like air traffic controllers, hospital doctors, and Border Patrol, must still report for duty with no pay until Congress restores funding. In federal hospitals, doctors and nurses keep working, treating patients, rescheduling electives, and stretching staffing despite uncertainty and missed pay. At border checkpoints, agents continue patrols and processing, prioritizing safety and emergencies, while over time freezes and morale is tested. It's a built-in emergency brake to prevent unauthorized spending, but it comes at the cost of a partially paralyzed government. In one word, gridlock. Shutdowns are the extreme outcome of political standoffs in Washington. Each year, Congress and the president must agree on how to fund the government. But if they deadlock over priorities, the funding bills stall. One side might demand budget cuts or policy changes, the other side resists, and if neither blinks by the deadline, the government runs out of money. It's essentially a high-stakes game of chicken, no compromise, no funding. In recent years, these showdowns have become almost routine in US politics. The last record-breaking shutdown was back in late 2018, during President Trump's first term, when a budget fight over border wall funding left the government closed for 35 days. Now, in 2025, we're once again in uncharted territory. This shutdown has just surpassed that to become the longest in US history. In short, shutdowns happen when political polarization heats up so much that lawmakers use the government's funding as a bargaining chip. And lately, it's happening with alarming frequency. A government shutdown isn't an abstract DC drama. It hits real people and services across the country. Start with the federal workforce. Roughly 1.4 million federal employees are going without pay right now. About half of them have been told to stay home, furloughed. And the other half are still on the job, doing everything from nursing patients at army hospitals to screening luggage at airports. But none of them are getting paychecks. Even US military personnel are affected. Troops initially faced missing their pay until emergency funds were shuffled around to cover one payday. These are everyday Americans, parents, veterans, public servants, suddenly worrying about rent, groceries, and gas because their paycheck stopped due to political feuding in Washington. Some have even lined up at food banks by week 4 of the shutdown, an unimaginable situation for people who signed up to serve their country. Beyond the workers, everyone else starts to feel the pinch. If you planned a trip to a national park or a museum, you might find the gates closed and the lights off. Iconic sites like Smithsonian museums, the National Gallery of Art, and the National Zoo have locked their doors as funding runs dry. Many national parks are either unstaffed, with trash cans overflowing and no visitor services, or completely closed for safety. Businesses around those parks lose customers. Tourists get turned away. The ripple effects are huge. Critical government services slow down too. Need a passport or a small business loan? Expect delays or a "sorry, we're closed" message. New Small Business Administration, loans are on hold, and federal housing loan processing is largely frozen. Farmers waiting on USDA support payments or researchers counting on federal grants are left in limbo. Even air travel can get rocky. Thousands of air traffic controllers and TSA agents are working without pay, which raises the risk of staff shortages and airport delays. Officials have warned that if this drags on, we could see mass chaos in air travel from understaffing. And for millions of Americans who rely on federal programs, the safety net phrase. For example, 42 million people on SNAP food assistance came perilously close to seeing their benefits halted. The administration said it would issue only partial SNAP payments this month due to the funding lapse, leaving vulnerable families scrambling. Programs like WEC, which helps pregnant women and children, have had to ration funds, and some Head Start preschools for low-income kids have already closed classrooms. In short, a shutdown might start as a political staring contest in Congress, but soon it's everyday Americans who feel the pain, from the park ranger suddenly out of work, to the single mom facing delays in food benefits, to the travelers stuck in longer airport lines, and the longer it lasts, the wider that pain spreads. This isn't just any shutdown, it's the longest in U.S. history, now stretching into its second month with no clear end in sight. That tells us a lot about how divided Washington has become. Let's break down what's fueling this particular standoff in late 2025. At the heart of the dispute is a fight over healthcare funding. Democrats in Congress are insisting that any deal to reopen the government must include an extension of Affordable Care Act subsidies. These are tax credits that help millions of Americans afford health insurance. Those subsidies, originally expanded during the Biden administration, are set to expire at the end of 2025, which would cause insurance premiums to skyrocket. We're talking average increases around 26% and much higher for some. Democrats argue that if they don't secure an extension now, families will be priced out of health coverage in the new year. They've drawn a line in the sand, no funding bill, without protecting those health subsidies. Republicans, on the other hand, say now is not the time for that fight. The Republican-controlled House actually passed a straightforward funding patch back in September to keep the government open temporarily until November 21st. Their bill didn't include the extra health care funding. It was a clean, continuing resolution just to buy time. When it reached the Senate, Democrats blocked it repeatedly, over a dozen times, because it left out the ACA subsidies. From the Republican perspective, Democrats are holding the government hostage over a policy issue. GOP leaders and President Trump insist they'll address the health subsidies separately, but only after the government is reopened. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson even refused to bring the House back into session for weeks, basically saying, "We passed our bill, the Senate should just approve it." And hoping public pressure would crack Democratic resolve. It didn't. Instead, as the shutdown dragged on, Senate Republicans started exploring a new compromise because the original House plan clearly wasn't going anywhere. All this political chess has real consequences. Day by day, the impact on Americans is growing more painful. Open enrollment for health insurance began on November 1st, and many ACA recipients were hit with sticker shock. Some saw their expected premiums triple because those extra subsidies haven't been renewed. Food aid for low-income Americans nearly stopped. 42 million people on SNAP were told their November benefits would be only half the normal amount until a federal judge intervened. Airports are warning of potential chaos as unpaid workers struggle to keep things running, and federal agencies are trying desperate moves. For instance, the Trump administration began unprecedented mass layoffs of federal employees in mid-October, claiming it needed to trim costs during the shutdown. Thousands of workers from departments like Education, Energy, and Homeland Security were abruptly fired, a move now tied up in court challenges and largely unheard of in prior shutdowns. Politically, it's a blame game with high stakes. Republicans accuse Democrats of shutting down the government over unrelated demands, pointing out that Republicans have already passed a funding bill to get paychecks flowing again. They argue Democrats should temporarily set aside the health subsidy issue, reopen the government, and negotiate that later. Democrats respond that Republicans control both chambers of Congress and the White House in this scenario, so it's on the majority to compromise, and that failure to extend the health credits now would effectively mean a huge healthcare cost hike for millions, which they call unacceptable. Both sides are digging in, and public frustration is through the roof. Polls show Americans aren't really picking sides in the blame. They're blaming everyone in Washington to some extent for this dysfunction. After all, from an average citizen's view, Congress's core job is to keep the government running, and right now it's not happening. Meanwhile, the economic toll is adding up. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates that this shutdown could sap as much as $14 billion from the U.S. economy if it continues into the coming weeks. That's money lost from halted services, delayed contracts, and workers not spending paychecks. Small businesses near federal facilities are hurting. Confidence in the U.S. government's reliability is taking a hit too. Credit rating agencies and investors watch these dramas nervously. In short, this shutdown matters not just because it's breaking records, but because it's showcasing how deeply divided our politics have become on fundamental issues like healthcare, And it's testing the limits of how our government functions, or doesn't, when that division goes too far. Here's the bottom line. A government shutdown isn't just political theater. It has real consequences for millions of Americans, and it signals a government at odds with itself. The longer this goes on, the more everyday life is disrupted and the more people start asking, is this the new normal? This 2025 shutdown will eventually end. They all do. But the big questions will remain. What lasting damage will it leave? And will our leaders find a better way to resolve these fights without freezing the country? Only time will tell. If you found this explanation helpful, don't forget to subscribe to Wait, Let Me Explain for more breakdowns of the stories that matter. And now we want to hear your thoughts. What do you think are the long-term impacts of these government shutdown showdowns? Let us know in the comments. We're as curious as you are about how this will shape the future. Together, let's keep the conversation going. And hopefully, we won't have to explain another record shutdown anytime soon. Thank you for watching. Before you go, choose a video on the right and subscribe for more clear breakdowns. New explainers drop every week.